Hello, afternoon. Good morning to those of you in the US, and good afternoon to those of you in Europe. My name is Anna Roderick, and I am the editorial director of Multilingual Matters. And it was my enormous pleasure to work with Sarah Benesch on her latest book, Pronatalism, Discourses and Counterdiscourses. Um, this event we decided to do and invite not just Sarah, but also Therese Shechter, who is a filmmaker, and their work unintentionally, I think, is in dialogue with each other. And so we thought they would have really interesting things to say about each other's work as well. So just housekeeping quickly, if you'd like to ask a question, we will get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the hour. You should be able to see the question and answer facility at the bottom. So if you type your question in there, we will try and get to it. We also have a discount code for Sarah's book, which I believe is PRON 40, which gets you 40% off Sarah's book, but also all the other books on our website as well. So you can go nuts. So I'm going to introduce Sarah and Teresa, and then I'm going to ask Sarah to speak a little bit about her book, and we'll have a chat, all three of us, about issues raised by her book. Then Teresa will speak a little bit about her film, and we'll ask some questions, and then we'll have some more general questions, and then we'll get to your questions. So Sarah Benesch is Professor Emerita of English at the College of Staten Island, City University of New York, where she taught linguistics courses and directed the English as a Second Language programme in the English department. Pronatalism, Discourses and Counterdiscourses, her most recent book, follows the trajectory of her earlier work on the relationship between language and power in English for academic purposes and in emotion studies. Therese Shechter creates documentaries examining widely accepted ideas about gender, identity, and sexuality. Her latest film, My So-Called Selfish Life, explores the cultural stigma around the decision not to have children. Blending personal narrative with interviews, history, and a generous dose of humour, the film challenges the idea that motherhood is an inevitable part of womanhood and invites viewers to examine how societal expectations shape deeply personal choices. My So-Called Selfish Life is the third in an ongoing body of work following I Was a Teenage Feminist and How to Lose Your Virginity that engages with complex topics in ways that are both accessible and thought-provoking. Her work has featured in the New York Times, NPR, The Guardian, and The Atlantic. My So-Called Selfish Life is screened in over 40 countries and continues to spark conversations about family, freedom, and fulfillment. And you can screen it, from the website, which is myselfishlife.com. And Sarah's book is obviously available from our website and from other places you can buy books from. So Sarah, if you want to introduce your book and your reasons for writing it, to start us off.
Sure. Thank you, Anna. And also I wanted to thank Flo McClelland and Eleanor Robertson for organizing this event. And thanks to Teresa for making such a fabulous film and for being here today to talk about it. So my reasons for writing this book, there were basically two motivations. The first was to explore so-called childlessness, and we'll talk about that word, from multiple perspectives. Personal, what were the events and conditions of my childhood that led me to the decision not to have children or my young life. Social perspective, I was interested in other women in applied linguistics who made this decision. Academic, had there been any research done on the topic in like sociology, women's studies, political, geopolitical, how are falling birth rates affecting pronatalism, and historical, what are the historical precedents of the current assault on reproductive rights? And then my other motivation was to raise the profile of women who choose not to have children. I wanted to contest the portrayal of childlessness as a void, a lack, a deficit, a failure, a source of shame and shaming. I wanted to show that it's a viable identity with multiple dimensions. For example, in my own department, there were several women who didn't have children, but no one ever talked about it. It was like a private thing. So those are basically the two reasons for writing the book.
Mute myself. So I think the first question I wanted to ask you is, you've written and edited several books over the course of your academic career, and they're much more conventional, if you like, academic texts, whereas this one kind of blurs the boundaries between academic writing, between memoir, between more personal writing. And so I wanted to ask you about, although you use a discourse framework in the chapter that specifically deals with your own experiences, I wanted to ask you about kind of transgressing those boundaries of what's acceptable in academic writing and using your own experience as kind of data, if you like, and what were your reasons for doing that to start off with, and also, how did you expect it to be received, and has it received so far the responses that you were expecting?
Right. So I want to first talk about why I took a discourse approach, because not everyone necessarily knows what that is. So I want to talk about that a little bit. And then I'll move to that other question. So the discourse approach is consistent with all my work that looks at the relationship between language and power. So the word discourse has many definitions, but the way that I'm using it is that discourses are ways of using language to promote ideologies and influence public perception. So if we take, for example, the ideology of nativism, which is so rampant right now, some of the discourses that promote this ideology are illegal aliens, controlling our borders, very important, us versus them, and taking our jobs. So my book centers on the ideology of pronatalism, which says that white heterosexual women must fulfill their biological destiny by having children. If they don't, they're not contributing members of society. They're pathetic and lonely. And the pronatalist discourses I examined are maternal instinct, biological clock. So both of those are obviously biologically based, like this is your biological destiny and having it all. So the first two emphasize procreation as a biological and inevitable process. And having it all ironically, is about limiting women's choices to three things: marriage, children, and a job that doesn't interfere with marriage and children. So it doesn't include writing books, travel, romance, the arts, and self-care. It definitely doesn't include self-care. So in terms of transgressing the boundaries between academic and personal narrative, so I considered writing just a straight memoir, and I was inspired by poet Molly Peacock's beautiful memoir, Paradise Piece by Piece, which is also featured in Therese's film. And that book helped me answer a question that had really plagued me. Was it that the circumstances of my difficult childhood had led me to forego parenting, or was I choosing a healthy path for me as an academic? And I think Molly's memoir helped me see that it's both.
Yeah.
One is chance and the other is choice, and they coexist. So I ended up including a memoir chapter, but didn't write just a straight memoir. But it also takes a discourse approach. Plus, narrative and ethnography have become much more acceptable in the field and academia in general, but in the field of applied linguistics, thanks to the work of Stephanie Vandrick, Sue Motha, Gary Barkazin, all of whom you know, Anna, and others, this has become acceptable. And so it wasn't that much of a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the response, readers seem to appreciate the blurring of lines, a mix of scholarly articles, research, images, cartoons, personal narrative. And especially they've mentioned the memoir chapter as an illustration of the academic ideas.
Yeah, Yeah, that's exactly my feeling about how people are reading it. Yeah, yeah. So Theresa, I wanted to bring you in at this point because you are very much in front of the camera in your film, as is your mum, in kind of a starring role. And so I wanted to ask you, obviously that's much more common in filmmaking than is in academic writing, but why did you feel it was important to take that role in front of the camera as well as behind the camera?
I have to unmute. Okay. Well, actually, all of my films have that kind of structure. I have a question that I'm asking myself, and my curiosity research leads to asking a lot of questions on screen and finding answers for them. So I always feel like I'm sort of the guide. I'm actually heard much more in my films than seen. I think if you add up the times that you see my face, it's pretty small but scattered throughout the film. I don't like being on camera particularly, but you do hear me, I narrate. So I really do feel like I'm kind of the guide, asking questions, helping others share some personal stories. And, I have my own thoughts and my own opinions, and it's really important for me to include those. So that's kind of how it all comes together.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that idea of kind of starting out on this process without quite knowing where you're going to end up is something that I think we'll come back to with both the film and the book a bit later. Um, so back to Sarah, one of the chapters I like most in your book is the final chapter where you write about how we as women, both mothers and mothers, might do better to not allow ourselves to be set against each other and to build community and to talk to each other in ways that are more supported of all of our lives. And I just wanted to kind of ask why you felt it was important to include that as a concluding chapter.
Yeah, so before I answer that question, I want to go back because you used the word "nother," and not everyone who's here on this webinar may know what that is. So that's a word I made up, and I'll explain why I did that. So, the terminology in writing this book was a real challenge because the words to refer to women who don't have children include child, like childless or child-free. And they maintain that semantic connection between woman and child. So I was like, I can't use those. And also, so okay, so instead I coined this term "nother." And "nother" was meant to be sort of parallel. There's mother and there's "nother," just one change. It describes not a lack like childless and not a celebration. To me, child-free sounds a little bit too celebratory. Whoopee, I'm free of children. So, I use it sometimes. I don't love it. So I wanted something different, something that connoted a thoughtful choice. It's a whole nother thing. And along with "nother," there's "notherhood" and "nothering," so that also works. So if someone asks, "Are you a mother?" you can say, "No, I'm another," and it kind of works.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I just wanted to make that detour in case,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, did you want? Yeah. So then the question about the last chapter, which is called "Reproductive Solidarity," and it felt important to me to make room for women who have various reproductive choices and make different choices, and that we organize with each other, especially with abortion bans and birth control being restricted or banned. So reproductive solidarity entails greater understanding between mothers and others, because both groups face challenges. Right now, we're being pitted against each other. It's childless cat ladies versus trad wives. But the truth is that neither mothers nor nothers are valued. Mothers are always being judged for not being a supermom, not doing enough. And they're expected to bear the entire burden of parenting, and not expecting any social support, I mean, not even spousal support. So I feel like we need to work together for all of it: prenatal care, parental leave, childcare, flex time at work, birth control, tubal ligation, and abortion. And I really appreciate the tubal ligation bit in Therese's film, because I think that's a really important, to be able to make that choice, and how it was so difficult for the young woman at age 20 who knew she didn't want to have children to find a doctor who would be willing to do it. So I think all of those things are part of women's rights and bodily autonomy. And though I don't discuss this in the book, men need to step up and engage with these issues too.
Indeed, yes. So Teresa, I was going to ask you about the idea of community in your film as well, but I know you have some thoughts about terminology, as Sarah brought up the term that she kind of coined, and kind of child-free and childless, and did you want to say anything about terminology?
Yeah, it's actually been a really big part of the whole process of making this film, because I've spent a lot of time in communities online, excuse me, 9 years, I would say now. And the concept of childless versus child-free, not everyone likes child-free, that's for sure. But I think it's a very important distinction to make, because it denotes intent, desire. There are a lot of things that people without children have in common. They're being treated like less than real women. They're being told that, you're not helping the world. There are a lot of insults aimed at women without children that really lack a lot of sensitivity to people who actually really want children and can't have them. So I've always found those terms useful, because you sort of know what you're dealing with. So I would not consider myself childless. I've never really wanted children, actually, and I don't have children, and that to me is sort of what child-free is. It's a good hashtag. So if you're on social media, you're trying to find your community, and we're going to talk about that later, how important that is. If you're trying to find your community on Instagram, you're going to do hashtag child-free or hashtag childless, and you're going to find the people you're looking for. It's a really great way to get there. So, but the other thing for me is sort of, I'm more of an expert in the child-free community, obviously, but within that community, there's a lot of diversity, and I don't just mean, racial diversity or things like that. I mean diversity in how people approach the idea of being child-free, and how they communicate the idea of being child-free. I have never liked the term child-free lifestyle. And I think that that's something Sarah also gets at. The idea that child-free is about having lots of money so you can travel and drink wine in front of sunsets and mountains and on your gold yacht rolling in your $100 bills. It's amazing to me how many times people really do just embrace that identity, and I'm always pushing back against it, because this is not a lifestyle. This is a very serious choice about living a life that is authentic to me. That's what this is. It's not about the wine and the mountains. So this is something I'm always pushing back against. There are also communities, because this is the internet, so there's a lot of communities where child-free people are quite nasty to parents. And again, you're going to find everything on the internet, so of course you're going to find this too. And there are terms like breeders, which I've always found really not cool. Things like that. I have been called a breeder pleaser because I give space to mothers in my film and I don't denigrate them. So that's another part of the internet, the child-free world. So I think you get all of it there. I think we have to live with that because that is our world. But I really think that the childless, child-free, is most important to me for finding the communities you're looking for. And it's amazing to me how many people are still finding out for the first time that these communities exist.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So at this point, it probably makes sense, I think, Teresa, for you to tell us a bit more about your film. For those of us who haven't seen it, I have seen it and it's great. So please, if you want to spend a few minutes talking about your film and how it came about and what your intentions with that would be really great.
Yeah. A little background on how the film came about. My films always kind of grow out of my own questions about things in my life that feel not quite right. To me, like, I'm very happy. Why do people keep telling me that I'm not happy? This is a refrain from many decades of my life now. But as I said, I always knew that I didn't want to be a mother, and it wasn't even a decision I made. I just always didn't want children. But the big impetus for this film, or the big realization, was when I went through menopause. And I looked back at like what I want to call my long arc of fertility since I got my period. Decades and decades and decades in which I didn't like fulfill what was my biological purpose and duty, on this earth. And the film is structured that way, actually, from period to menopause. But I really sort of wondered, like, did I have to have kids? Is my life does it still have meaning if I didn't have children? What's the value of my personal freedom? What is a fulfilling life? And so it kind of grew out of that. And these questions that I had then were asked of the many different people in the film, including Molly, who's wonderful. Molly's book was the first book I ever read about choosing not to have children, actually. So our premiere for the film was Mother's Day weekend of 2022. It was a global streaming premiere. It was very successful, really wonderful to launch that way. It was right when Roe v. Wade was being overturned. And it really centered the film in conversations about reproductive justice and bodily autonomy. So while it started off as a film about like what makes us happy, how do we choose the lives we want to live, ultimately it really was about those issues. And having Roe overturned right then really focused press on those issues, which I was really pleased about. So the film has really grown and changed in the creation of it. But also we've been able to include a lot of the things that Sarah has in her book, which I love talking about this because we really are looking at the same kinds of things, these real touchstones of this story, but in different ways through different media. And there's animation explaining the biological clock, and there's a lot of really interesting and diverse characters, some living fairly unconventional lives by modern standards, and having all of those tools at my disposal. It's really what I like about filmmaking. So the films travel to conferences, universities, film festivals, screenings for large and small groups. I was recently at the National Women's Studies Association conference doing a presentation on teaching feminism through pop culture, which seemed to be designed exactly for me to do. As you said, it's been seen in over 40 countries, still going strong. The film's next stop is Denison University in Ohio in just a couple weeks.
Fabulous. So I wanted to first ask you about humour, because it's a very funny film, and that if you kind of describe to someone what it was about, that's perhaps not what they would perspective, but there's the kind of deliberate humor. There's lots of, memes and pop culture references, but there's also then just the life stories that come out from some of your participants are just very, very funny as well. And I just wanted to ask you about the use of humor in your film, and kind of why you took that approach and why you allowed that to come out so strongly.
Like me being the narrator and present in my films, using humor is something that also comes up in all of my films, mostly because I'm really challenging these, cultural norms around womanhood, I guess, for lack of a better word. And these are things that really feel threatening and difficult to a lot of people, more than you would imagine. I'm always surprised at how controversial my films end up being. But I think humor is a really great way to help people engage with these things without feeling uncomfortable, without feeling threatened. That's been really important because of that. You want people to laugh with you instead of at you, obviously, and child-free women have come up for a lot of abuse, as have childless women. J.D. Vance, just one example of that. And then the other thing is, it's more fun. It's more fun to make a funny film. But I don't know how to make any other kind of film. So I don't know what that says about me. But I think some of the secrets are, in terms of what I would call casting. There are people who are very serious, and there are people who are very funny in this film, and it's a nice mix. But I want people who will be lively on screen, who have strong opinions. Chanel Dubosky, who's in the film, has one of my favorite lines. She is our cat lady of the film, and she's talking about one of her housemates. She lives in a house with 7 other artists, and one of her housemates is like, what do you think is too many cats? And Chanel says, 20? And her housemate says, 5. 5 is too many cats. And I can't do it as well as she did it, but it's like little moments like that I just think are nice. And the other thing I think is the animations. I work with an incredible animator, Luke Murphy. I've worked with him for 3 films. And I think the animations really bring a lot of humor to it. We decided at some point that we wanted a stork to show up several times in the film. And at the end, he's in the end credits drinking a martini. And a lot of that is with Luke, just putting in these little details, excuse me, that people may not notice, but like the same little woman shows up in 3 different animations running. So, I mean, that's really all of it. And honestly, when I write, it's also, sort of got humor to it. I realized that I've been doing humorous work since I was in art college. I didn't realize that. So yeah, I don't know how to do it any other way.
It's entirely fair enough. And Sarah, I wanted to bring you in on kind of humor as well, because I can remember during the writing process, you were kind of sending me ridiculous biological clock images, and the childless cat lady thing happened while you were writing the book as well. And I can remember, I think I was trying to find an image for you, and me and my colleagues spent an entire afternoon laughing at photos of 50s housewives on the internet because it was just ridiculous. But I suppose it's a question slightly about, isn't it, as us in our bubble as well, that like this stuff is so stupid, it's funny, but equally the consequences of these kind of discourses are becoming horrifying and potentially very horrifying. And how do we kind of square that humor with the potentially incredibly serious consequences of these discourses?
Yeah, well, I mean, humor is an essential part of activism. And, people like Abby Hoffman understood that. They would do these, he would go to Wall Street with fake money and throw it in the air, and the traders would go grabbing, he was like illustrating the greed of capitalism. So, we have this great example right now in Portland, Oregon, where demonstrators outside the ICE facility are wearing inflatable frog costumes. And, this is, when I see that, I feel like laughing and crying at the same time, because it's so poignant that they thought to do that it's so absurd. You have these people, militarized people, pointing guns at frogs. I mean, it's absurd, but it's dead serious. And I like that juxtaposition. So in the book, I have a lot of humor, cartoons, and so the images, like I think of one, this the biological clock, it's a woman holding a cuckoo clock, and she's dressed in a vintage dress. And there was some satire about these images, and I included that, and that was this poor woman spends so much time shopping for vintage clothing, she forgot to have a baby. And I love that kind of thing because it just turns everything on its head. So I have cartoons, I have satire, there's the how to make a biological clock out of a potato, which I included, which is pretty hilarious. But it includes like sexual harassment. So, it's got all of those elements in it. And I like that. And I like that about the film too. It's a serious subject, and there's a lot of humor that we can use as a tool for activism.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
pointy tool.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
So Teresa, I wanted to ask about social media, both in terms of its presence in the film and the way that your participants in the film use social media to find their communities and their kind of homes, but also how you used social media building a community for the film and getting word out about the film, and obviously it got a lot of reaction on social media. So is this a rare positive side of social media, and do you think that this is actually a really important role for social media in helping people who make non-mainstream choices find their people, their tribe, their community?
Yeah, just as you say, I think it's vital for people to understand that they're not alone, and the things they're thinking about, feeling, other people think about it and feel it too. And that level of validation, I think, is so crucial, especially to one's mental health, to know that you're not some kind of freak. So, and as I said earlier, I still get emails from people saying, oh, thank you for making this film. I didn't know that this was even a choice I could make. This is 2025, and these are the emails I'm getting still.
Yeah.
I think it's also been really important. Sarah mentioned voluntary sterilization procedures, which, many people who know they don't want kids seek to get. They're very hard to get if you haven't had children. However, and as we see with one of the people in my film, Lauren, who, she's 19 when she actually finds someone who will do it for her, but she'd been trying for 5 years, actually. And and she got it through a crowdsourced list on Reddit of doctors people had seen that they could get a tubal ligation or different other bilateral self-injectomies, things like that. And there's more and more of that now. And some of them are being run by gynecologists, and some are just crowdsourced lists. So you can now, you have a tool for if this is something you want, you have a tool for finding it. And since Roe v. Wade was overturned, requests for both things like tubal ligations and vasectomies skyrocketed.
Oh, really?
So, people want to be able to control their own reproduction, they really do. Anyway, but the way we used the internet for our film was in several ways. One of the most profound was at the very beginning of this process, I put something up on Facebook, which would have been in 2016 maybe, and it was a survey, and I said, tell me about your experiences not having kids, and a link to a survey. And I posted it once on my Facebook page back then. And I thought, well, maybe my friends will do it. My friends will see it and they'll take this survey. So after about a week, we had 1,900 responses to this survey. And after the second week, we got another 1,900 responses. And it's the only thing I've ever done that's gone viral. but people were sharing it and sharing it and sharing it. And first of all, I got a lot of information, which really broadened my thinking on what this topic was. But also, I thought, I guess people want a film about this. They seem really enthusiastic about this. And a lot of people would put in the notes like, please, please, please talk about this kind of thing. So social media for the survey was key. There's no other way to get that kind of coverage, you know. We started building our mailing lists. Our Facebook page grew to 11,000 members. I don't know what the word is anymore. 11,000. And that was sort of at the height of our fundraising. So we did a Kickstarter fundraiser, and having all of these followers and having a growing mailing list, you know, really helped us raise money. We raised like $46,000 on that campaign. So again, really key, and especially if you don't have a marketing budget or a publicist. But we also did a lot of different kinds of posts, series of posts. We were basically doing our own, you know, propaganda, basically. Like, you don't have to have a child to be an accomplished person. Like, for example, there are many deeply accomplished people that never had children. And we did a series of people with their photos and a quote. Some wanted kids and couldn't have them. Some didn't want kids. But that was a very long series of people, from, you know, Oprah to postmenopausal. My brain is not calling these things up. But anyway, so there was a lot, and it was constant. We were posting up to 3 times a week for years and years and years, mostly on Instagram, but also on Facebook and Twitter back then. I have really pulled away from social media over the last year or two. It became really exhausting and was starting to affect my mental health, like so many other people have talked about. So I'm not on social media that much anymore, except for very special things that I want to get out. But yeah, it was crucial for us, and I think crucial for a lot of people who feel like they're not part of the mainstream.
Yeah. And I guess I read a thing earlier that kind of peak social media use was in 2022, and it's just declined and is still declining since then. I suppose for these kind of communities online, it'll be really interesting to see where they go if that's the case.
One thing, can I add one thing about the communities?
Yeah.
When I was first online and studying and belonging to many of these communities, they were so white. They were white. That's it. Over time, there were more and more and more people who were dealing with these topics that were not white. Angela Harris, who shows up in Sarah's book, who has a social media empire specifically for Black women.
Yeah.
And that really started growing after a while. So that was also really important, because it also helped me understand the different communities and how we get into it. But it took a little time to really see that, which was, well, anyway, yeah, predictable, and glad that that's changed.
Yeah. So Sarah, I wanted to bring you in there to so you have a chapter about kind of discourses online of about childless women, and you also kind of go into the experiences of famous women in the past who have chosen not to have children or haven't had children. Virginia Woolf is the kind of obvious one, and I wanted to get your thoughts, because it's not something you write that much about in the book, about this idea of online as well as being a place for spreading unhelpful discourses about people's life choices, that the difference that the internet and social media can make to what even quite recently, I imagine was quite a lonely experience sometimes. And your kind of thoughts about that.
Yeah, so in that chapter, what I was trying to do was contrast the sites that really were more about exchanging information, and they were anonymous. There was one in Iran, others in the US, and Reddit ones, and there was one called Childfree Journal. And contrasting those with ones that were more like the lifestyle brand with merch. You can buy a tote bag, you can buy a mug, and but I also make the point, even though I make the contrast, that they all create community, and so they're important resources. I myself obviously didn't have that kind of thing when I was making my decision, and I think it would have been hugely helpful to have something like that. And I have not joined any of those communities, but had that been available to me at the time, I think it would have made the process less lonely and alienating, because I really did feel like I was making this decision completely on my own.
Yeah, no, I can see that. So before we move on to questions from the audience, just a couple of general questions for both of you. So Sarah, the title of your book was not Pronatalism until really just before it went into production. I think it was a very late in the day change. And Theresa, you also said that you weren't making a film about pronatalism. And that was one of the things that kind of evolved in the process of making the film. And so I suppose to both of you, really, what happened? How in 2025 have we ended up here?
Well, for me, what happened was the lead up to the 2024 presidential election, and all the talk that was coming out about childless cat ladies, and childless women shouldn't even have the right to vote, all the stuff that the vice presidential nominee was putting out there. And it was really shocking. And I felt like I need to talk back to this. So some of the working titles included things like voluntary childlessness, mothering discourses. And I was never really that happy with any of them anyway. Then I thought, okay, here's that term pronatalism that the media is really picking up on. And every day there were articles in the Times and other newspapers and magazines about pronatalism. It was almost becoming a household word. And I'm like, okay, so I have to choose this. But I also have to show that, Counterdiscourses is not like I'm promoting it. But I think some people, when they see the title, they might think that, which is not a bad thing necessarily. Then they buy it and they find out it's not. But yeah, so that was really the reason that I needed to change the title.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, the film started off with a question like, why is Thanksgiving so unpleasant? Because your aunt is sitting next to you asking you when you're going to give your parents grandchildren. Like that was the kind of beginning premise of this. Like, why are people such jerks about this? And after a time, maybe about a year into working on this, it took like 5 years to make this film, which is average. Yeah. It became clearer and clearer that this wasn't an individual person problem so much as it was a societal problem. And the film really pivoted a bit to focus in all the ways that we are constantly being reinforced that the right thing for a woman to do is have children. Something as innocent, I suppose, as I noticed that pregnancy test commercials, like nobody was ever happy to see a negative. This has changed like about that much, but every single commercial were positives and hugging and crying. And I mean, that's wonderful if you want to be pregnant. That's an amazing moment. Right. But a lot of us don't. Even if we want kids, we're usually not, we don't want to see that positive, only the negative. So that was like one of these things where it's like, I never noticed that before, but that is curious. Things like in popular culture, the childless woman was kind of the bitch or the villain or the crazy lady or, things like that. There weren't a lot of really positive or neutral even portrayals of people didn't want kids, didn't have kids. So I was always looking for my heroes, in Grey's Anatomy. Sandra Oh plays a doctor who doesn't want kids, and that comes up in the storyline quite a bit. And so things like that. So this lack, if you can't see yourself, then who are you? And then finally, I have to say that I and some of people I've collaborated on other projects with, we were seeing the really early signs of this kind of pronatalism, in 2018, 2019, and nobody cared. Nobody wanted to talk to us about this at all. But it needed to be in the film. And so it really became a film that looked at the ways that we are constantly being told we should have kids, but also the ways that some of us are being told we should not have kids. So pronatalism for me is not just the pressure to have kids, but also the policies, devices, doctrines that keep others from not having kids. So it's reproductive control. It came down to reproductive control and reproductive autonomy. And I think, we talked about humor in the film. There are some parts of this film that are very serious. And I think the challenge of the filmmaker is to be able to modulate that tone throughout the film, from funny to serious back to funny again. But I take these things very seriously. Even if my films are funny, I'm very, very serious about the unbelievable amount of pronatalist bullshit that is being spewed on us all the time, and especially Project 2025 and the 2024 election has really brought it. They're saying the quiet things out loud. It's become but the good news is the media has actually started writing about pronatalism, and that word isn't quite such a mystery to people anymore. So maybe that's good, but I still have several rants about what's going on. So yeah, that was a trajectory. It certainly made it a far better film than just talking about annoying relatives.
And of course, and you kind of touched on it there, that the kind of face behind the mask of pronatalism is eugenics. And I know as well, Sarah, during the writing process, you were kind of like, oh, and I'm including a chapter about this now, which I wasn't necessarily expecting to do. Mm-hmm. And so I just kind of, there's no answer to this question, possibly. It's just a wow. But we're talking about eugenics in 2025. Like, this is, why has this come up again, do you think? Why are we swinging back in this direction?
Yeah, well, I do think it's about controlling women. I mean, in the parallels between, Teddy Roosevelt in 1905 yelling at white women, there was a kind of racial panic. Oh my God, all these immigrants are coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, the Catholics and Jews, and they're going to take over from the Anglo-Saxons. So there was this racial panic. And it's a little bit different now, but there is still that panic. Women are not stepping up and having children. They're going to work, and they're having different kinds of lives. So we got to get them back in the bedroom, back in the home. And, I think those are the parallels.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed reading Sarah's chapter on eugenics. I was jealous that you could get so much information and research into a chapter of writing, and we had to do it in 2 minutes, basically. Right. Such is the nature of film. But I think that well, for one thing, sterilizations were going on in women's prisons in California until maybe 5 years ago. So that was still happening. Eugenics changed.
And it's happening in the ICE facilities now.
Yes. Yes, there have been reports of that also.
Yes.
There's a really good documentary called Belly of the Beast, which is about the California prison system and what they did to mostly non-white poor women. So it's still very real. And I think that, you know, when you look at pronatalism, I think personally that behind the mask, I find, you know, white supremacy, I find Christian nationalism, I find just good old patriarchy, and I find capitalism. And I think that all of these things play really well with pronatalism because they serve very specific purposes. And, you know, and capitalism is really tied into the declining birth rates on the surface, like, oh, we want to have Social Security. But really what it is actual race panic, you know, white race.
Right, because if they wanted to have just a growing population, they would let in immigrants. I mean, and this is true in South Korea, China, here. They don't want those babies. You know, so it's not just population, it's which babies.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And the replacement theory, I don't know if people are familiar with this. It's one of the big talking points of the conservatives and particularly white supremacists. But this idea that there is this huge conspiracy going on, run by the Jews, of course, speaking as one. Nobody invited me, but anyway, it's going on. And it is a conspiracy to bring more and more immigrants, Black people, people of color into the US so they can overtake the demographics of the country. This is something people really believe. And this is not a good thing for anybody. But they talk about this all the time. And, you know, part of the pronatalist push to encourage white women to have more babies has to do with replacement theory. So the great replacement theory. So yeah, it's just happening. It's happening now. It's happening while we're sitting here, and I think it's getting worse because of the level of power that the current government has in the U.S. and because the Heritage Foundation is behind a lot of it, and it's really scary, and people should be, you know, paying attention to this. But I will say, when the childless cat lady stuff started with JD Vance, one thing that really made me feel good, speaking of humor, people started posting, women, mostly women, started posting pictures of themselves with their cats.
Yeah.
Proud childless cat lady or proud child-free cat lady. And they were funny. But I think at the same time, I don't think you would have seen this big public show of child-free women, you know, out there like 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. The fact that there were so many women out there going like, I'm child-free and I have a cat, you know, or I'm childless, I have a cat. That's kind of a positive, and it's entertaining, but it's also a very public pushback at that kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, it's really nice. So we should fit in a couple of questions not from me. So I have one from Jane Benesch, who I'm presuming you might know, Sarah.
It's Benesch, by the way.
Benesch, sorry.
That's all right. Stress on the first syllable.
So she asked, did you note a contrast between the discourse around this issue in the mainstream media in the US versus in other countries? So do you
understand the question?
So do you think, is there a contrast between the very specific context in the US and what's happening in the mainstream media in the US and in other countries that you're aware of? And I know you talk about a couple of other countries briefly in your book, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, the countries that I looked at were mostly around the falling birth rate issue. So China, South Korea, and there, you know, there's a lot of concern about the falling birth rate and how we're going to get women to have babies. And they're throwing all kinds of incentives at them. And it doesn't seem to be working that well because the women are pretty much fed up with the men not doing anything. And like, you know, if you want us to have families, then the men are going to have to help the women.
Yeah. In Korea, Japan, China, there is a big pushback, some of it organized, some of it casual, against, you know, marriage and parenthood being a really bad deal for women. Yeah. Basically, like it's just a bad deal and we don't want it and we're not going to do it. I think that in places like India, for example, there's a huge anti-natalist movement in India. You know, no one should have any more kids ever, partly because of population issues. So there are different reasons in different countries, but it's a global phenomenon. And yeah, you honestly, based on history, the only way to really grow your population is to take away all reproductive health care.
Yeah.
Romania, for example, good example. Iran is a good example. It's the only way.
Yeah.
You know, force people to have children.
Yeah. So I think we've got time for one more question from Bonnie Norton, who says, thank you for a great discussion. Have Sarah and Theresa noticed any trends in the ways in which males and females and other gender sexual categories have responded to the issues you raise in your work?
Sorry, you got cut off in that last bit. It
So,
froze.
have you noticed any trends in the ways in which males and females and other genders have responded to the issues that you raise in your work?
I mean, the one thing, and I think Theresa mentioned this, is there has been an increase in vasectomies, and not just the procedure, but also Google searches. Like after Roe v. Wade was overturned, there was like a 100% increase in searches for vasectomies. So that's a good thing.
I think you know, in the film, I'm being very cis and hetero in all my conversations. The film actually includes you know, several people who identify as queer or non-binary. I think one interesting thing is one couple in the film who are a married couple. One of them is a trans man and a non-binary person. When they got married, and they looked like a straight couple at that point, right? Like a straight couple. And one thing they talk about in the film is as soon as they looked like a straight couple, they started getting all this pressure to have babies. And, you know, not just from, like, say, family, but from their queer community. So I think one interesting thing to think about is how this kind of pressure transcends everything. So even the queer community, as Leo says in the film, that, you know, wants to break through stereotypes and boundaries, they're still living in this place where this couple needs to have babies. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you both ever so much for this fascinating discussion. I will just remind you that you can see Theresa's film, if you haven't already done so, at the website, which is myselfishlife.com. And you can buy Sarah's book from our website and from other places that you can buy books from. On our website, you can use the code PRON, PRON 40, which will get you 40% off Sarah's book, but also off all our other books as well. Thank you ever so much. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to Sarah and Theresa for your work and for such an interesting discussion. I've certainly got lots to think about, and I'm sure everyone else has. We'll say goodbye. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Theresa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.